I'd just like to introduce you to our speaker today. So I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Ify Nwokoro. Ify is one of our National Advisory Forum members, and the National Advisory Forum provide expert advice, support and challenge to our work and how we achieve our objectives. Ify is a disability awareness spokesperson and blogger who works in higher education as an expert by experience. He draws from his experience of social work while living with a spinal cord injury after a traffic accident left him quadriplegic in 2010. His exposure to healthcare, social work and legal services drive his focus on independence alongside disability. His interest in equality and anti-discrimination stem from his experiences as a Nigerian immigrant. If he works with social work students, academics, newly qualified social workers and their supervising practitioners at Teesside University, James Cook Hospital and Middlesbrough Council, I'm absolutely delighted that he's able to join us today to speak. I have the very great pleasure of working with him as part of the National Advisory Forum and really look forward to what he's got to say. So I'm now going to hand over to Ify.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ify, and firstly, it's an absolute honor. It's an absolute pleasure to be speaking to you all today. And yeah, without further ado, I'll just jump into the session. So I'll start off with a bit of background on myself. So I'll set the scene for the things I'm going to be talking about. My journey with disability, which is what started off, where this all started, began in 2010. At the time, I was a student at Teesside University. I was in my second year, and I was very much in that stage of my life where I was, discovering my youth, discovering who I was, enjoying like having been my first couple of years at university. I played basketball very actively. I was very involved with the university itself. I worked in the student union as a course rep. I was very active. I was enjoying my life and all the best that I had to offer. Unfortunately, in April of that year, I was in a road traffic accident. There were five of us in the car. The driver lost control of the wheel when we were on the motorway. Thankfully, no other cars were involved and nobody lost their lives. It was an interesting experience. Um, I always say how ironic it was that I never actually got to feel any of the pain because the sensation was cut off before the signals like got to my brain. So I was just like calm for most of it and wondering what was happening. It even took a while for me to realize um that there had been some damage and what the damage was. But yeah, I got airlifted to James Cook Hospital. Fortunately for me, one of the many fortunate things I've had in these last 10 years now was the accident happened in Middlesbrough where there's a specialist unit for spinal injury. So I was airlifted straight there, operated on, and then like sort of came into consciousness from all the painkillers medication. A few days after, that's when I was given the official diagnosis. That was interesting. Didn't sink in for a while, and at that time, as I said, I hadn't felt any pain, and the effect of the injury hadn't taken full effect. I got moved to the rehab unit after about a month or so, and that's when things really got difficult. That's when the work started. That's when I started to feel the effect of the injury. So we're talking things like basically the level of injury, the level area affected is from about halfway down my chest. So that means the bottom half of my lungs don't work. So I had to relearn to breathe. I'm now prone to a lot of chest infections. That informs a lot about how my day goes. Like there's a lot that has to do with me, paying attention to my chest health and that sort of thing. Other things like relearning how to view myself, how my position in the world was, and that kind of thing. let alone all the physical side of things and the medical aspects of it. But it was a good, it was a good and interesting 6 months in terms of I learned a lot. As difficult as it was for me and those around me, it was definitely like probably the um most powerful learning period I've had like in a short space of time. But after that 6 months, I got discharged and went straight back into uni. Now it was interesting because I went the day I got discharged was the same day I had my first lecture. I literally took a taxi from the hospital to the university, finished my lectures, came back to the hospital with a taxi, and then got discharged properly. And it's always interesting when I say that. It sounds like, oh, like, I've done something great and all that. But to be honest, it was a choice between going straight back into university, which was starting at the exact time I was getting discharged, or take some time off, which would have meant being off for a whole year. I was not certain about my mental stability, how things had affected me psychologically. I knew there was a lot for me to go through. I didn't want to have to deal with that on my own, not having something else to sort of pass the time with or to keep me busy, keep my mind off, the darker side of things. And it definitely worked. It helped a lot because I went to university, and instead of all my days being consumed with thoughts of why did this happen to me, how do I tackle this new problem that I never had before, um, that was sort of balanced out by also thinking, oh, I have a deadline in a week, or I have an exam tomorrow that I'm panicking about. So it made the sort of the medical problems, the spinal problems, um, a lot easier to handle because I wasn't focusing too much on them. By the time I graduated in 2012, I developed a lot of sort of coping mechanisms without realizing. And that's definitely something having that distraction of university helped a lot with. So moving on from that, I took a year off trying to figure out what I was doing. And I had studied animation. It was creative digital media it was, but I wasn't able to continue the course in the way I'd started it. I got into the course because I did a lot of hand drawing, and unfortunately, that wasn't an option anymore. So I had to finish off the course with a lot of adaptations to it, but none of those adaptations or changes that were made to the course involved hand drawing. So I ended up graduating, but not falling out of love with what I was doing. So I took a year off trying to figure out what to do next. Didn't come up with anything, but I decided whatever I was going to be doing, well, I'd like to make some money off of it. And at the same time, I was moving from getting care from agencies to like privately sort of like running my own care team. So I decided to do a master's in business management, and the business side helping with whatever money making schemes I came up with later on in life, and the management side of things to help out with managing my care team. That was a brilliant experience as well. And another ironic thing that happened at that point was I didn't actually finish a master's course. I did the whole course and didn't write my dissertation, so I got a postgraduate certificate. But that was a conscious choice I made because I felt I'd learned everything that I needed to learn. Well, I'd gone through the whole course. Writing the dissertation in my head was to prove to the rest of the world that I'd gotten those things, but the reason I needed them was for myself. It was oddly a very liberating decision to make. It was what for the first time was a decision I made completely of my own volition, regardless of what was happening. Everything else before that point, it seemed like I was forced into the decision, like the decision to go back into uni straight after, the decision to find something to do after graduating, like a lot of decisions I've made in my care. But yeah, it felt really good to make a decision based solely on what I thought was best for me. And I have used the knowledge I gained from that master's course. I still do till today, even though I might not have the plaque on the wall to go with it. But since then, I've just a few things I've gotten involved with. as Amina mentioned earlier, I write a blog, My Life in a Chair, and exactly what it says on the tin. It's me talking about my disability, my life as it's been since injury, and just sharing experiences and like life lessons I've picked up along the way. Um, the extension to that, or rather from that, I started doing talks at the university at Teesside. I got invited to do a couple sessions, and it's become sort of an ongoing thing now. There's a service user program at Teesside University where people like myself from different backgrounds, different life experiences come in and talk to the healthcare students. So I started doing that. So that was the first time I got involved with social work as well. Um, Met social workers there from Middlesbrough Council, and that's how I got involved with Middlesbrough Council, doing the same sort of sessions for newly qualified social workers and social workers in the assisted first year of experience. And that was very intriguing, like seeing the world of social work, because that was something I wasn't familiar with at all. I mean, coming from Nigeria, where it's not exactly a well-known or well publicized profession. Most people don't know it exists, or at least didn't at the time I left left the country. So it was a very big eye opener, like learning everything there was to learn about social work. But then on the other hand, by being someone who now use social work services, it was really interesting the experiences I had, some of which I'll touch on in a bit. But the experiences I had as someone who needed the services and understanding what the importance of the service was, and why I would prefer them certain ways, or why some experiences are better than others. That's all the nuances about doing a profession like social work. Yeah, that was a big deal for me. A big reason why I decided to apply for the role on the National Advisory Forum for Social Work England when that became available, and I'm really honoured to be able to get that position, and hopefully I can actually, as my mom put it, be the change I want to see in the world. So the way I see it, if I can improve social work from the other side of the coin, and everyone on my side of the coin as service users um, will also benefit from that as well, myself included. Yeah, so that's the basic background for myself. My first proper experiences with social work came while I was in hospital. There's always a resident social worker in the spinal unit. The lady who's there at the time, I honestly didn't know much about her, like throughout the majority of my stay. It was one of those things where, because we were so focused on the medical side of things and to an extent the psychological side of things throughout my stay in hospital, I knew of her. I knew like where her office was. She'd introduced herself to me, so I knew she was sort of lingering in the background. It wasn't until we started getting close to discharge that she then stepped in, and my God, did she step in? She pretty much started with coordinating things like my care and the decision to go back to university. So she put together a few MDC teams for different meetings. With the one for the university, we had people from representatives from the university itself on different levels. There was someone representing the university as a whole, someone representing the course I was going to be doing at the university, and they had a disability advocate as well coming into time into the meetings. And everyone else from the hospital, nurses, the discharge nurse, the physios, occupational therapists, that sort of thing. And they were able to help me come to the decision to go back to university, let me know what's possible, and then initiate like put things in place for that to actually, happen successfully. Things like the changing around of what the course was like, and making sure like I was I was being put in my class was being put in rooms that were accessible. That's all. A lot of things I would never have thought about, but they made it possible. It it's it's very easy to take for granted the position, the role the social worker played. Because she set all that up, and to my surprise, she wasn't in most of the meetings. She just needed to make sure they happened and make sure they happened well. I think she was like in the first one, and once it was sort of guaranteed that okay, I'm in good hands. She took a step back, which was something I respected. Knowing when to help and always being there as a point of call if I needed any more help, anything else in particular I need help with. So she did that, set up that meeting, set up the same sort of thing for when I was looking at what my care would be like out after discharge. I was going to be in 24-hour care, still am. Organizing things like the care agency that was going to come in. There were a couple that came in and sort of pitched how they could implement my care to me. So I was very much made an active contributor to deciding how things are going to go forward, which was another thing I really valued from her. And then once that was done, it was accommodation. She took a personal, very active role in that. She organized um, the, the body that sort of provided the accommodation. It was basically independent living. Um, wasn't necessarily assisted, but my carers would have been there with me, so they didn't need to provide the care. They provided the accommodation, and I had no furniture, had really nothing to put into the house. I mean, I was a student at the time of the accident. Most of the things I owned were just things that could fit in my suitcase and PlayStation, that kind of thing. So she went as far as putting me in touch with um, places to get some furniture for cheap prices, or in some cases even for free. She even gave me some of her furniture, and yeah, just basically set me up for um, what life would be like living outside a hospital. And unfortunately, that was the last major contact I had from her. Not long after all that was set up, she left the team. I think she might have actually retired or just resigned. I'm not sure. But I'm eternally grateful for the part she played. From that point onwards, my social work journey um, became a bit unconventional. Now, by that, I mean I wasn't working directly with social workers on a regular basis anymore. Reason for that being because it was a car accident and there was um, liability involved, there was an injury claim involved, the whole process. There were a lot of legal um, actions that needed to take place, a lot of legal things that needed to be set up, and because there was money going to be involved, I needed to be protected. So the first thing that the spinal unit helped sort out was getting me a case manager. Now, in my head, a case manager is, well, she basically did a lot of the things a social worker would have done for me. So the role a social worker would have played in my life at that period of time was what she did. The different main differences would be, well, obviously she's not a social worker, so there's certain things that um would be different in the way she operated. It was a paid service, so I pretty much had direct access to her, and um the workload was I wasn't sharing the workload with too many other clients, that sort of thing. But she was very, very experienced with spinal cord injury, so she became that sort of compass in the same way the social worker in the spinal unit was a compass to pointing me in the right direction to get back to university, to accommodation, sorting out my care. My case manager became the compass to point me to things like getting spinal specific equipment, things like getting an accessible car. When I finally decided to move and get my own place, she helped me with all of that, putting me in touch with um, resources for accessing equipment I need on a daily basis, be it medical equipment or um, otherwise. Um, and I worked with the way. Oh yeah, that was the other thing. because of the legal side of things, she also served as my advocate in a lot of meetings with some of them with people who didn't necessarily have my best interests at heart, whether it was on a professional level or not. And one thing I found interesting about the way she worked was everything she was doing was designed for her to eventually give me my independence back and slowly step out the picture. So as time went on, I needed her less and less, which was something I obviously respected, considering that's how she made her money. But that's what obviously the job entailed. So I'd like to think I'm as independent as I could be, despite being 24-hour care and obviously the physical assistance I need with certain activities. Um, but yeah, she helped me set up most of the things that I have now, where I'm living. Same car I got 10 years ago, and still like going on with, and it still gets you from A to B. So I'm not looking to change that anytime soon. But yeah, it was a very interesting experience. Right down to the point where I decided to move from agencies to employing my carers directly. She helped with that transition um, to from being just a client to an employer as well. As much as I learned a lot from the master's course, there were a lot of nuances and little things that I would have never been able to figure out without some assistance. So she helped with that. And as time went on, she also stepped out of that as well. At the moment, her company just basically helps me with payroll and recruitment, the very technical side of things that I can't don't have the professional skills to carry out myself, like taxing and that. Yeah, taxing my employees, payrolls and that sort of thing. Things I can't afford to make mistakes with or experiment or learn on the job. But yeah, um, that was basically my experience closest to social work for quite a while, and I still work with her till today. Um, since I got discharged, though, I have had um experiences with like actual social workers, and first of all, going back to the sessions I started doing with the university and working with municipal council and working with the university social work department, um, it was then I realized first of all how much um similarity there was between what a social worker does and what my case manager did. It was then I understood where a social worker might be able to do some things differently, maybe better, maybe not. It was then I understood where she had to step in as a case manager and did some things differently, maybe better, maybe not, than a social worker would have. But it definitely gave me a massive appreciation for um, what the social work profession is, because I saw how where I was fortunate enough to get a private service to fulfill a lot of those needs, to play that role in my life. Most people in my situation, in similar circumstances to what I was in and what I'm in now, may not have access to that, and it's the social worker that does all of that. I have a massive respect for all the things that I knew they would have been doing, and then all the things I've now seen they do as well. In addition, because obviously when I first got involved with social work, um, all of my experience was from a point of disability, but I had no idea like profession cut across so many different fields. That was a lot of learning that I had to do while doing my sessions with the university, and meeting other social workers, other service users who were working with social work in the same capacity I was, but with different experiences, and hearing them speak about their experiences with social work. It was absolutely brilliant. Next time I got um, involved with actual social workers as a service user, as a client, was in 2016, and I'd been in the hospital with some pressure sores. I was on bed rest for most of the year. I spent a few months in the hospital in that year, and well, to set the background for that particular aspect of things, with that set of experiences. While I was in university, straight after discharge, I wanted to seek financial aid, any sort of financial support that I was eligible for, and could help, ease the burden on the like day-to-day living, my care, that sort of thing. I went into booked the appointments, filled out the forms, all that malarkey. Um, got to the final stage, or what I believed was the final stage, of the decision being made or being told, whether I'd be eligible. And I mean, it's been almost a decade, so I apologize if I get any details wrong. But the decision was no, I wasn't eligible. But it came down to essentially because I'm an international student, or I was at the time, and I was paying like full tuition, which is, or which at the time was more than a home student would pay. That in itself was proof that I had finances, but I was choosing to put them into education. And bless her, I don't know what the profession of the lady I was speaking to was. She was sat behind the desk. She might have just been passing on information that she'd been passed down herself, and basically said for me to be eligible for that particular aid I was applying for, I would essentially need to not go to university, and that way I could then argue that I'm not going because I didn't have the financial aid, which seemed a bit counterproductive or counterintuitive to me. But she then tried to chip in that that would also mean I'd get financial aid, and all the money I'd be spending on university, I would have that as well. And that's like a win-win. And to me, like, no, that's a lose-lose. I want to go to university. What are you talking about? Well, it was strange how the fact that I was trying to get an education and better myself and not be as much of a burden on the system was the reason I was being denied the aid I was trying to get. So I put that behind me. I decided I'll leave it. I finished university and then apply for the same thing again. Seeing as well, I'm not a student anymore. And what I then got told was because they basically did all the checks, checked all my details, all my circumstances at the time, and again, it was denied because, and again, I'm summarizing, my circumstances hadn't changed all that much since graduated, since I went to uni. And then as I finished 2 years of university, I could afford 2 years of the tuition, and my circumstances haven't changed. There's nothing to prove that I don't still have that funding to be able to, say for instance, go to do another year of university. Because of that, I wasn't eligible. And I'd had it with trying to get public aid or public funding rather, that was direct financial funding. That sort of left a sour taste in my mouth for applying for things like that. So jump forward again to 2016 when I was on in the spinal unit with the pressure sores. The social worker who was on at the time, and God bless her soul, she was just trying to help. And to be honest, like it was a learning experience. Like we watched how she stepped in. But anyways, she looked through my records. I was obviously she was unfamiliar with me. She wasn't there when I had been a patient, so she looked through just doing the due diligence. Found out I wasn't receiving any financial aid at the time, and decided well she could think of a few things I'd be eligible for. But there was one particular one, the name escapes me now, that was designed to basically help with my care, which was something I needed a lot at the time. I mean, um, the annual costs for my care are just ridiculously astronomical. And any help, any sort of way to ease that burden was more than welcome. So she put the idea to me. Between us, we managed to apply for this other set of financial support, and I made it very clear from the start. I wasn't interested if it was some because at the time I was already managing my own care. My care was very self-directed. I have a lot of independence in terms of what it is I do day to day, what my life looks like. I didn't want a situation where the aid was dependent on um, them bringing in their own standards, whichever whatever body it was, bringing their own standards of what my care should look like. So I made it clear from the start. If that meant I wouldn't be getting the aid, then I was fine with that. If that meant I got less aid, I was fine with that as well. So that was fine. We established that it wouldn't be a problem, or at least shouldn't have been a problem. Applied again, social worker worked the magic, put together a few MDT meetings with all sorts of professionals involved with the situation, and including the lady who's going to make the final decision as well. And we just noticed from the first meeting, she's a bit standoffish. It just almost like she didn't want to be there. Not that she wanted to be there. It just felt like a bit of negative energy coming from her way. But went through the motions, had the meetings, the form I filled out to initiate the stage of having the meetings. It was a points-based system, and was split into different sections based on what I would need aid for. And I think of the 12 or 13 sections there was only one I didn't score the max points on, and that was mental capacity. Everything else on the form, I needed some sort of support. So I was more than eligible. I scored really high on the eligibility of form, and I basically got the impression it would be smooth sailing from here, which was a new experience for me, considering what I'd experienced in the past trying to get financial support. And things moved on. I was waiting for a decision to be made. I finally got discharged, and while I was back at home, I got contacted to say the lady would need to make to do a final inspection at my own home to get a look at what the setup was, how things would be, what my accessibility was like, if they need to put anything else in place, that sort of thing, and also have a discussion with me to iron out final details. And like the skeptic part of my brain started thinking, why does she need to see my setup if um that's not going to be changed? Like as I said from the start, like I didn't want that to be altered. But anyways, that was probably just me being paranoid at the time. So the meeting was booked. She came in, and straight away, like it didn't feel right. She walked in with the same energy she was at the meetings with, and she had a notebook and a pen right from the door. Started taking notes and asking me, "What's this for? Why is that there?" We sat in the living room. She's like, "Oh, there's a bunch of cables there. That would be a safety hazard." And she were writing a notebook, and we need to do something about that. And she picked something else on, pick up on something else, and by the time we actually got to talking about the decision or what steps we need to make here, like she already pointed out quite a few things that she was essentially saying would need to be changed or altered or reviewed or that kind of thing. So I was already uncomfortable with the meeting at this point. And then she said, in order for her to continue with the decision making process, she needed to see essentially what the court order was for my compensation for my injury claim. She on paper, and what she said, which I to a large extent understand, was she needed to see if the court order designated whatever compensation I got for my care, in which case there's already a provision for my care financially, which would make it, which would nullify my eligibility. That's what she said. Now, this could be a case of me not knowing much about that profession or how these bodies work, but with how I put things together, how I understood it, and the energy she was giving me, had been giving me since the first time I ever met her, it sounded like she just wanted to know how much I was awarded. And I'm used to living in, well, Lisbon to me is a small town. I come from a massive city, and that kind of mentality just again, brought me the absolute wrong way. But she insisted, like, like we wouldn't be able to move forward with the process, if that information wasn't made available. As far as I knew, that was confidential information. I wasn't comfortable giving that out, and that was how the whole process ended up dead in the water. So I informed the social worker. She was very apologetic about the experience I had, but I reassured her that I reassured her it wasn't, obviously it wasn't her fault. Anything didn't go that went the way it did, but I was more than grateful for the experience. I was more than grateful for all the other things that it opened my eyes up to in terms of getting financial aid, the things that would make me eligible, etc. And I have used like the things I've learned from then to actually be able to get some financial aid and that I was eligible for, with a lot less scrutiny from the people giving me financial support. So in the end, happy ending, but not so great experience leading to the happy ending. I kept in touch with the social worker. And that's another thing I didn't mention that I started doing. I volunteer, well, before the pandemic, I volunteered on the spinal unit, basically doing care support to people who were experiencing what I had experienced years ago, being new patients, and very rewarding experience. Something that I even learned a lot from, because I sometimes go in and either meet other experienced patients who had been injured longer than I had, and they would give me advice, or just see different circumstances from what mine were and maybe appreciate my situation and um, my own blessings, and also appreciate the strengths in others with the different things they were going through, that sort of thing. But yeah, while in that role, which I started in 2017, so I had a good 2 years in that position before like things started going crazy with the pandemic. Um, I got to see that social worker quite a lot. I got to see her work with other patients. I got to see, well, not just see, like hear from those patients without her in the room, like what they felt about what she was doing, what the other social workers were doing, the effect it had on them. Obviously, both positive and negative, but again, it just skyrocketed my opinion of the profession and made it very clear that this is something that I would like to contribute if the opportunity ever came up. So yeah, well, that also pushed me in the direction of getting involved with social work England. Even that was an opportunity I would never have seen coming, and I was fortunate enough to find out about when it did come up. But yeah, so I built a bit of a relationship with that social worker, and after a while, um the reason it was only 2 years I was in that role before, well, from 2017, was I had another precious son that put me on bed rest, but at home. So in the month leading up to lockdown, I wasn't able to go in, and I, lost touch with that social worker, and well, most people on the spinal unit, anyways. So I mean, I checked, I tried to get in touch with her, even like to watch this session, and I couldn't really reach out. She's not on the unit anymore, from what I understand. But yeah, um, that was my up. And then other than that, I've had little bits of interactions with social workers in the community. Most recent of which was um it was sometime last year when I was struggling with some of my care needs. The effect of the pandemic on the accessibility to care, and I had a few carers who left, but then recruitment was an issue. And I needed, like, I had a few days where I was short on staff. I got in touch with social services, so worked with a social worker to find out, what my options were, what the best options were. She put me in touch with a few agencies that could provide emergency cover and that sort of thing. So I'd say that was the last experience I had with social workers. as a client. But moving on from that, actually no, before we move on from that, all of that put together, as I said before, it is giving me a very massive appreciation for the job, for the profession of social work. Now, I also wanted to touch on, my experiences with discrimination, or what I think may have been experiences with discrimination. Growing up in Nigeria, I was surrounded by people who looked like me, spoke like me, so I wasn't aware of the idea of discrimination, especially at a young age. When I did learn of it, it was something that happened in other places. Well, we had ethnic um, divisions like in the country, so that was the closest thing I had to like feeling discriminated against. But it definitely leaves a different taste in the mouth than say racial or disability discrimination. But what that meant was when I moved to the UK, I didn't have a solid grasp on what discrimination could look like. So I think it shielded me from what possibly were a lot of discriminatory experiences, because I just didn't realize that's what they were. I would just chuck it up to something else, maybe someone not having a bad day, or maybe not liking me as a person, or whatever the case may be. But I know for a fact that some some experiences left me feeling a bit funnier than others. And I look back now and I think I didn't feel it was discrimination then. Only in hindsight am I thinking maybe it could have been discrimination. And I have no idea whether they were or not, but I choose to focus on positivity. I have enough negativity to deal with on a daily basis. So maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but it's worth noting. Because I don't know how much of my experience with the lady who was supposed, oh, not just that lady. Every time I tried to apply for financial aid, I don't know if any of those experiences were racially motivated, because I asked myself, if say I was not black, say if I was a British citizen, would she have so brazenly asked for what was my personal information, confidential information, that from my understanding of that financial aid had no bearing on, or should have had no bearing on, the decision to get that aid. I didn't know if that was something that was racially motivated. I didn't know if it was any other form of disability or any other form of discrimination, whether disability or otherwise. But in hindsight, I see how maybe it was. I choose not to hold on to that. But yeah, I'm glad at least I had people around me to help get me through those experiences, and especially the social worker who was there to, well, made it a learning experience for me, to draw out the best of those situations. Yeah, I would say that's probably everything I have to talk about today. But it's a bit funny leaving it on that note. Either way, it is what it is. So yeah, that's me done. I think we've got some time for questions.
Thank you very much, Ify. I just had a slight technical glitch, so apologies for leaving you hanging. It was becoming very difficult to mute. So that was wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing your experience, such powerful reflections. There's been loads of positive comments in the chat, and quite a few questions. So it'd be great to be able to ask you some of those. Before I move on to the questions, I just want to read a comment from Flo. So she said, I'd just like to honour and thank Ify for using platforms such as this and his blog to raise awareness and give voice to his journey. I'm a firm believer in the power, in a lack of a better term, expert patient, in being a catalyst for systemic change. I work in mental health and often see people's trauma resulting in inertia, and people get so stuck. It's amazing you are using your journey to not only provide hope and support for those with SCI, but also to inspire change. I salute you. Thank you. So I just thought it'd be nice to share that with you and everybody else. So a question from Donna: being in your situation, many would have given up after their accident. What was it that drove you and gave you that inner strength and determination to get up and get on with your life? You are black and a black man and a disabled black man. However, you didn't let any of these isms hinder you. And this links to the last point that you ended your session on. So I thought it was a good one to start with. Over to you, Ify.
Okay, so I think every anytime this comes up, in terms of how I cope with things, I always end up sounding like I'm trying to be too humble. But the truth of the matter is, I can't take the credit for um coping as well as I have and doing as well as I have with in the circumstances that I found myself. I had a very strong support network from the get go. Um, I've I've got a very typically large, loud Nigerian family, and we are like as close as anything. Throughout the time while I was in hospital, bearing in mind, at least at the time, at least half of the family I was in touch with lived in Nigeria. But there wasn't a week where I didn't have at least 3 days with different family members visiting. So like we're talking, those who lived in the UK would take out time from work, from university, from whatever it was that their major occupations were, to come and spend time with me. I mean, family even rented an apartment here in Middlesbrough, so that when they came over, they had somewhere to stay. So there was a permanent base, like a home base here, for them to spend time in. And then family from Nigeria would travel over as well and like spend as much time as they could. But what would have essentially been their holidays, it ended up being time devoted to myself. I remember my sister's birthday being around the time I was in hospital, and I've got videos from that day. It was all in. This was before they got the apartment. It was an accommodation the hospital had provided, and I just seen all of them there despite everything that was going on, still being able to be like joyful and all together, enjoying one of their own or another member of the family. It sort of drove home what it meant for all of them being there for me as well, and sort of gives an idea for the kind of support I got from them. That aside, I had the professional support I had was brilliant. The spinal injuries unit here at James Cook is absolutely amazing. I could not sing their praises enough. And then things like the university itself being as accommodating as it was, moving things around as much as they did for me to be able to finish my course, at least moving things around within reason. But things I didn't even know could be altered. They really helped a lot because I was very involved at the university beforehand, and it was good to see that sort of loyalty paid off or not rewarded more or less. I'm still very tight knit with the university, the student union, and a lot of professionals that I don't necessarily have I don't have interactions with at the moment, but they still provide support. They always get in touch to just check in on me, that sort of thing. So yeah, all in all, I had a massive support network that really helped. I would say things like when my race came into play, what I said about not having a strong awareness of what discrimination would look like probably helped a lot as well. Coming from Nigeria and most of all, my upbringing. Massive kudos to my parents and the adults around me growing up. Um, my idea of wanting to see positivity in as much positivity in most things in life comes from them. That's how they live their lives. That's how they taught me to live mine. So even when things have gotten difficult, it's been a case of there's a positive aspect to this. I can't afford to miss out on it. And after that experience has ended, as much as everything has been negative in that experience, or most things in that experience have been negative, the positivity still shines through. When I remember those experiences, I'm still able to draw from the positive side of things and take consolation. So yeah, it's been a combination of a lot of things I've been blessed to have.
such an amazing response, Ify. Thank you. And actually, I'm smiling as well because there were quite a few questions that people asked around adaptations that were made in terms of education, your family response, and how you maintain your positivity. And I feel you covered them all in that response, actually. So I'm not going to go through to them. I think that was a fantastic answer. So I'm going to move on to a question from Anne. And Anne said, thank you so much for sharing your story here and in your blog. Where do you think your social work support could have been more holistic? For example, relationships, faith, spirituality, social connection support. What would you recommend to social workers in these areas that are perhaps less practical?
So I think I don't know how evident it was from everything I've said. My experience with social work itself as a client, as a user of the service, has been overwhelmingly positive, which is more than I believe most can say in my situation. Starting right from the start, the lady who helped with my discharge and all of that. When I talked about her helping me out with furniture, I mean, um, I feel that was above and beyond the call of duty, especially with regards to her giving me some furniture as well. Things like that, thinking of, oh, yeah, her mindset then was not just giving me a place to live, but a place that I could call home. That was something I felt was quite holistic, especially because she was drawing from what she'd seen from me, from my mom, from my family, and what she felt was important, and from speaking to me as well. And yeah, but the thing she did went a very long way to providing that. I've had the same with my case manager, where I've been able to at least go directly to her, or she suggests something, be it resources for holidays or places that are accessible that I could have experiences in, or like just relax and chill out, that kind of thing. And then the support given to my family as well. But with regards to what I feel people could do, um, that maybe weren't done for me, or were done for me and I haven't seen done for others. I would say I won't give specific examples. I would say more a case of it comes from the mindset. It comes from that having that holistic mindset, and having that for any single person comes from empathy. So the two biggest things I always say to social workers in terms of like advice or things for improvement or things they could take on for themselves is self-care. Because I mean, a lot of us know how difficult the job can be, but then empathy, working on um being able to put yourself in the shoes of your client, being able to understand where they're coming from. I believe a lot of aspects of CPD continue um, or continue professional development. Yeah, should to revolve around the empathy things, like you see in your clients that you could learn from. You could make yourself more aware of, whether it's a case of making yourself aware of a lot of cultures you come across, or a lot of situations people go through, and how those things affect them. All those things inform how you can then be holistic with your approach to social work, because it puts you in their shoes and lets you know not just the technical things that you could help them with, or that you would normally help them with anyways, as the profession dictates, or a lot of the things that they feel are important that might not necessarily be addressed um, from the technical side of the profession. Um, so yeah, like you will almost end up finding out yourself what the holistic approaches or decisions would be with each client, if you can find a way to empathize with them, regardless of their background or whatever the case may be. Yeah, that's on that one.
Thank you so much, Ify. I'm going to take one last question. Apologies that we won't be able to get through all of them. There were some incredible questions. I'm just going to do a little plug for Ify's Twitter page, at My Life in a Chair. I'm sure he'll be happy to answer questions at a later point. So do give him a follow. So the last question is, the experience of applying for financial support is notoriously difficult and stressful. How did this make you feel, and where did you receive support to continue with your claim and remain buoyant? So I think you've touched on a bit of this, but I just thought it was a helpful one to answer, because I think a lot of people would find it helpful.
So in terms of how it made me feel at the time, simply put, it made me feel less than. I mean, in my journey of learning how to live this new life as someone with a disability, one thing that became very, very evident from the start was because of the misconceptions I'd had about disability before my injury, I now felt I was less than, I was incomplete after the injury. So my recovery process outside of the clinical healthcare related side of things were very much focused around how do I rediscover myself? How do I become whole again? How do I begin to see myself as whole again? Those experiences reduced me to very specific and technical criteria, like someone suggesting I forego my further education in order to get financial benefits, and I'm thinking, you're literally telling me that my financial education is worth the amount I would have gotten, the aid I would have gotten, which I ended up being able to live without. So, I mean, it's a case of, are you telling me I could live without the aid, or in the same way I could live without my education, which is nowhere near true. So, yeah, I would say those experiences made me feel less than, you know, less than a full person, basically. In terms of coping with them, definitely the people who helped me, social workers who were involved with the situation, and the support I had at home to come back to vent, get things off my chest, and have my own self care definitely helped with coping with all of that.
That's great. Thank you so much, Ify. And again, apologies that we can't get through all the questions, but we have run out of time. And I just want to spend the last few minutes to go over to Laura, our illustrator, to be able to just look at what she's been able to capture from today's session. So hello, Laura. Thank you.
Hi everyone, Ify, thank you for an incredible talk. I hope that I've done you justice, and what I tried to pick out was some of your key points rather than trying to get down everything and the richness of what you were saying, because it was incredible. So I will share my screen now, and I always draw a big deep breath at this point and go, I hope it works. So can we see this? I'm going to look for a nod. I'm hoping so. Yes, perfect. So Ify, on the left side, we touched upon your journey first, and I thought that was really interesting to see the learnings that you took from it. So obviously you talked about in 2010 you had a road traffic accident which turned your life upside down, and how that you were airlifted to hospital and paralysed from the chest down. And I really liked what you said about relearning how to be in the world. It wasn't just about your injury and learning to cope with that, it was also about relearning how you negotiate the world as a Black, now disabled man. But I loved that you talked about throwing yourself back into uni as your focus, and that actually that helped your mental health and coping mechanisms, and that you kind of inadvertently started to cope just by having a different focus. You touched upon studying creative digital media, and that actually you had to finish the course in a slightly different way to how you started it, and then realised that you'd fell out of love with it, but moved to an MA in business management. And again, loved what you said about, you didn't need to prove yourself by finishing the dissertation, because you knew what you'd learned. You didn't need to prove that to other people. And actually that helped you and empowered you to learn how to make your own decisions. And all of that kind of business management knowledge has helped you negotiate your care and your kind of new life. You touched briefly upon some of the things you're doing now as a blogger, as a volunteer for the spinal unit, and also as a speaker, and how you're involved with Social Work England now. But I had to get this quote in from your mum about being the change you wish to see in the world, and I think that's so important. You then spent some time talking about your experience with social work, and I also put some social work reflections in there too. So I loved that you were talking about that your social workers became part of your care, advocacy, and showing you the possibilities of what you can do, and helped you with this transition from hospital to your home and new normal. And you touched upon how your care needs needed to be met, and how accommodation, your social worker helped you secure that. And I also liked what you were talking about, that you were a real active contributor in what you needed, and that was so crucial about this co-production of your care. and also how it was useful in helping you finish uni and go on to your masters, and then also the legal side of things with negotiating your accident claims and that kind of thing. But focused at the heart of this was securing your independence, and I think that's partly due to your own personality as well as kind of what the social workers were aiming for too. So I thought it was important to mention. And then at the bottom right, there were some reflections on social work more generally in the last sort of 15 minutes of your talk. You were talking about the breadth of services that they offer, and actually there were some challenges in your experiences because there was this real complexity around managing finances and where you were eligible for things and where you weren't, and how that was handled could have been better. But you finished with this, appreciation of the job and how much social work has contributed to your experience. But on reflection, did discrimination underpin some of those negative experiences that you had? And again, liked what you said about you try and turn things into a positive and leave with a positive note, but actually perhaps that was what was actually going on. So that is in a very whistle-stop tour of the chat today, but thank you so much for having me, and it was an absolute honour.
Thank you so much, Laura. Brilliantly captured as ever. Really grateful to have you here today. And finally, want to just say another huge thank you to Ify. Such an incredible and inspiring session. I'm always enthralled by what you say and always really grateful that you are offering your expertise to us here at Social Work England. So thank you to everybody for joining us today. Just want to let you know again that the recording will be made available shortly after Social Work Week on our YouTube channel, and we really hope that you enjoyed the session today. We'd appreciate it if you can take some time to complete a brief survey, which Joe will have added to the chat. And we welcome any thoughts or feedback that you have through our post-event survey or by emailing socialworkweek@socialworkengland.org.uk. Thank you once again for attending, and thank you, Ify. Really hope that people enjoyed the session, and we hope that you continue to enjoy the rest of the week. Please do share your thoughts on our social media as well, so hashtag Social Work Week 2021. Thank you again, everybody. Take care. Bye.